My name is Daniel, and I never thought I would find myself in a situation like this. I'm a regular guy, married to the love of my life, Jessica, for nearly 10 years. We met in college, spent countless nights talking about our dreams, and built a life together that I thought was solid. We lived in a cozy suburb, had a dog named Max, and shared a love for travel. Our most cherished memories were from the trips we took together, especially the one to the Caribbean 2 years ago. Little did I know that the very paradise we adored would become the backdrop of my greatest nightmare. It started subtly, as these things often do. Jessica began to spend more time at work, claiming she was working late on projects. I wanted to trust her, to believe in our marriage, but something felt off. I watched her slip away, her laughter becoming less frequent, her smiles more forced. I tried to shake off the nagging feeling in my gut, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. But the signs were there, and I couldn't ignore them forever. One evening, after a particularly long day at the office, I returned home to find Jessica on the couch, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She quickly hid it when I entered, a telltale sign that something was amiss. I brushed it off, but my mind raced with possibilities. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments in my head, trying to figure out what had changed. The warmth of her body next to mine felt distant, as if there was a chasm growing between us. Then came the day of the revelation. It was a Saturday, and I decided to surprise Jessica by taking her out for dinner. I wanted to rekindle the spark that seemed dimmed. As I prepared for the evening, my phone buzzed with a message from a friend. He had just returned from a cruise and mentioned a bartender who had caught his eye, a young guy named Jake. The name struck a chord, but I dismissed it, chalking it up to coincidence. Later that evening, as we sat across from each other at a quaint Italian restaurant, I noticed Jessica's eyes wandering, lost in thought. It was as if she was a million miles away. I tried to engage her in conversation, but it felt like I was pulling teeth. Just as I was about to address my concerns, she excused herself to the restroom. When she returned, her demeanor had shifted. She was pale, her hands trembling slightly. "Jess, are you okay?" I asked, concern creeping into my voice. She avoided my gaze, and in that moment I knew. A wave of dread washed over me. I had to confront her, to rip open the wound that was festering beneath the surface. I took a deep breath and asked the question that had been gnawing at me for weeks. "Are you seeing someone else?" Her reaction was immediate, a deer caught in headlights. She stammered, searching for words, but the truth hung in the air like a fog. I felt my heart shatter as she finally admitted it. "I met someone on the cruise, Daniel. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake." Her words echoed in my mind, and I felt a mix of rage and despair. I had trusted her, given her everything, and this was how she repaid me. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. I could barely process my emotions as I listened to her half-hearted apologies and excuses. In that moment, I felt something shift within me. The love I had for her twisted into something darker, something that craved justice. I could feel the embers of revenge igniting in the depths of my soul. I had to act, to make sure that this bartender, this Jake, felt the consequences of his actions. I would not let my wife's infidelity go unpunished. As I drove home that night, the city lights blurred past me, and I realized that I was no longer the man I had been just hours before. I was a man transformed by betrayal, ready to orchestrate a plan that would ensure Jake faced the repercussions of his choices. I parked in our driveway, my mind racing with possibilities. This was just the beginning, and I was determined to make him pay for what he had done. The confrontation with Jessica left me reeling, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. Betrayal, anger, and a deep sense of loss clashed like thunderclouds in my mind. I knew I had to process what had just happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had taken a dark turn. As I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the wall, I felt an overwhelming urge to channel my pain into something tangible: revenge. I spent the next few days like a ghost, moving through life without truly living it. Jessica tried to reach out, to apologize and explain, but I was too consumed by my thoughts. I needed a plan. I needed to make Jake feel the weight of his actions, to ensure he understood the chaos he had unleashed in my life. I began my research. I reached out to my friend who had mentioned the bartender, hoping to gather any information I could. His casual mention of Jake's charm and charisma only fueled my anger. I learned that Jake was a relatively new bartender on the cruise line, known for his flirtatious nature and good looks. It sickened me to think that my wife had succumbed to his allure, but I had to remind myself that this was not just about Jessica's betrayal. It was about holding Jake accountable. I pored over the cruise line's website, studying their itineraries and ports of call. The more I learned, the more I realized I could use this to my advantage. I discovered that the cruise ship had a regular schedule, making stops at several tropical destinations. It was the perfect opportunity for me to plan something that would leave Jake stranded, facing the consequences of his actions. The thought sent a shiver of excitement down my spine. I began to sketch out a plan. I imagined myself as a puppeteer, pulling the strings that would lead Jake to his downfall. I would make sure he lost everything: his job, his reputation, and the thrill of being the charming bartender who stole another man's wife. I started by gathering intel. I created a fake email account, posing as a disgruntled employee of the cruise line. I crafted messages that hinted at Jake's unprofessional behavior, detailing his flirtations with passengers, specifically mentioning how he had crossed the line with a married woman. I knew that if I could get this information into the right hands, it would set off a chain reaction that would ruin him. As I composed the emails, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. Was I really going to do this? Would this act of revenge truly bring me peace? I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the end goal. I wanted to make Jake pay, to feel the weight of the pain he had inflicted on me and my marriage. Each day, I became more consumed by my plan. I crafted a series of messages, ensuring they were detailed enough to raise suspicion without revealing my identity. I sent them to the cruise line's HR department, hoping they would take action against Jake. I imagined him being called into a meeting, his confident demeanor crumbling as he faced the consequences of his actions. The thought brought a twisted smile to my face. Meanwhile, Jessica remained oblivious to my machinations. She continued to reach out, desperate to salvage our marriage, but I was a fortress, closed off and unyielding. I couldn't let her back in, not yet. I needed to see this through. Days turned into weeks, and I watched as the pieces began to fall into place. I received confirmation from a friend who worked in the industry that Jake had been summoned for a meeting regarding his conduct. My heart raced with anticipation. This was it. I was one step closer to ensuring he paid for what he had done. But as I delved deeper into my plan, I began to grapple with the moral implications of my actions. Was I becoming the monster I despised? The thought haunted me, but I quickly brushed it aside. Jake had crossed a line, and I was merely making sure he understood the consequences of his choices. The night before Jake's scheduled meeting, I found myself packing in my living room, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had never felt so alive, yet so conflicted. The thrill of revenge was intoxicating, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this path would only lead to more pain. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the image of Jake's smug face from my mind. I envisioned him standing at the bar, charming another woman, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit him. The thought fueled my resolve. I would not let this go unpunished. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose. I was ready to execute the final phase of my plan. I would ensure that Jake was left stranded, not just at sea, but in the wreckage of his own choices. The days leading up to Jake's impending reckoning felt like an eternity. I had meticulously crafted my plan, but as the time approached, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what I was about to do. Revenge had become my obsession, and yet I was acutely aware that it could spiral into something I couldn't control. I had to remind myself that this was not just about Jake. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my sense of self-worth after the betrayal. I had learned that Jake's cruise ship was set to embark on a week-long journey to the Bahamas, with a stop at a private island where the crew was known to take some time off. It was the perfect opportunity for me to ensure he faced the consequences of his actions. I had a plan to make sure he was left behind, stranded at sea, forced to confront the reality he had created. The night before the cruise, I made a series of phone calls to a few contacts I had gathered over the years. I posed as a concerned passenger, reporting a potential issue with the ship's safety protocols. I knew that if I could create enough concern, it might lead to a delay in the ship's departure. I had to ensure that Jake would be caught off guard, perhaps even enjoying a night out at the local bars, completely unaware of the impending chaos. With each call, I felt a rush of adrenaline. I was treading a fine line between justice and vengeance, but I was determined to see it through. I convinced myself that this was the only way to make Jake realize the weight of his actions. He had taken something precious from me, and it was time for him to face the consequences. The day of the cruise arrived, and I spent the morning monitoring social media, watching for any updates about the ship's departure. I had set up a fake account to track the cruise line's posts and comments. As the hours ticked by, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. Would my plan work? Would Jake be left behind, forced to reckon with his choices? As the ship's departure time approached, I finally received the confirmation I had been waiting for. A post from a fellow passenger indicated that the ship was experiencing delays due to technical issues. My heart raced. This was my moment. I quickly sent a message to my friend who worked in the industry, letting him know that Jake was likely going to miss the boat and to keep an eye on him. I imagined Jake standing at the port, his confident demeanor crumbling as he realized he would be left behind. The thought brought a twisted sense of satisfaction, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing guilt that lingered in the back of my mind. Was I really the hero in this story, or had I become the villain? As the hours passed, I continued to monitor the situation. Jake's social media accounts were buzzing with excitement from his coworkers who were posting pictures and stories from the ship. I felt a pang of jealousy and rage, but I pushed those feelings aside. I was on a mission and I couldn't afford to lose focus. Then, just as I was about to give in to doubt, I received a message from my friend. Jake, been taken off the schedule for the cruise. He's not on the ship. A rush of exhilaration flooded through me. My plan had worked. I had orchestrated this moment. And now Jake was facing the consequences of his actions. I envisioned him standing on the dock, furious and confused, as he realized he had been left behind. In the following days, I received updates about the ship's journey. Jake's absence was noted by his coworkers, and whispers of his behavior began to circulate. I had ensured that he would be the topic of conversation, the bartender who had crossed a line and faced the repercussions. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction every time I saw a post or heard a rumor about him. But as the adrenaline faded, reality began to settle in. I was left alone with my thoughts, grappling with the aftermath of my actions. Jessica continued to reach out, desperate to mend our broken marriage, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. How could I face her after what I had done? I had become a man consumed by revenge, and I was starting to realize the emptiness that came with it. As I sat in silence, the weight of my actions began to sink in. Jake was suffering, yes, but what about me? I had lost sight of who I was in this quest for vengeance. I had allowed my pain to morph into something dark and twisted, and I was no longer sure if I could come back from it. In the quiet moments of reflection, I began to understand that revenge might not bring the closure I sought. It had transformed me into someone I barely recognized, someone who was willing to hurt another person to soothe his own wounds. I had to confront the truth. I was not just hurting Jake, I was hurting myself. As I faced this internal conflict, I knew I had to make a choice. Would I let this cycle of revenge continue, or would I find a way to break free and reclaim my life? The days turned into weeks, and the thrill of revenge that had once consumed me began to fade, leaving behind a hollow emptiness. I watched as Jake's reputation crumbled, his once charismatic persona now overshadowed by whispers of scandal and betrayal. He had been fired from the cruise line, and I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that my actions had played a part in his downfall. But the victory felt shallow, as if I had traded one kind of pain for another. Jessica continued her attempts to reach me, sending texts filled with apologies and pleas for understanding. I could sense her desperation, but I was not ready to confront her. Every time I thought about facing her, the image of her with Jake flooded my mind, and I felt the anger bubbling back to the surface. I had to find a way to move forward, but I was stuck in a cycle of resentment and betrayal. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a post from Jake. He had taken to Instagram to share a picture of himself, looking disheveled and lost, with a caption that read, "Sometimes you realize too late what you've lost." The words struck a chord deep within me. It was a reminder that I was not just hurting him. I was feeding into a cycle of pain that was consuming us both. I sat in my living room, the weight of my actions crashing down on me. Jake wasn't just a bartender. He was a person with dreams, aspirations, and a life that had been derailed because of my desire for revenge. I had become the very thing I despised, someone who sought to inflict pain on another to soothe his own wounds. As I grappled with these realizations, I decided it was time to confront the aftermath of my actions. I picked up my phone and dialed Jessica's number. My heart raced as the line rang, each beep echoing my uncertainty. When she finally answered, her voice was a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Daniel," she said softly, "I've been so worried about you." "Jessica, we need to talk," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We agreed to meet at a nearby cafe, a neutral ground where we could discuss the wreckage of our marriage. As I sat at the table waiting for her, I felt a mix of anxiety and anger. Would I be able to forgive her? Would she even understand the depths of my pain? When Jessica arrived, she looked different, her usual vibrancy dimmed by worry and regret. We exchanged awkward pleasantries before she finally spoke, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I never intended for any of this to happen. I made a terrible mistake." I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. "You think I do? Know that? You think I haven't replayed that moment over and over in my head? You chose him, Jess. You chose to betray me." Tears welled in her eyes, and I could see the guilt etched on her face. "I know. I was caught up in the moment, and I let myself be someone I'm not. But I love you, Daniel. I want to make this right." Her words hung in the air, and I felt a pang of longing for the life we once had. But the bitterness of her betrayal still stung. "Can you ever truly make it right? How do I know you won't hurt me again?" She reached across the table, her hand trembling as it hovered over mine. "I promise I will do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. I'll go to counseling, I'll do anything, just please give us a chance." As I stared into her eyes, I saw the desperation and sincerity, but I also saw the shadow of my own pain reflected back at me. I had been so consumed by revenge that I hadn't truly considered what I wanted. The cycle of anger and hurt had become a prison, and I was the one holding the keys. "Jess, I need time," I replied, pulling my hand away. "I can't just forget what happened. I can't just pretend everything is okay." She nodded, her expression a mix of understanding and despair. "I'll give you all the time you need, but please don't shut me out completely. I want to fight for us." As we parted ways that day, I felt a glimmer of hope mixed with uncertainty. I had a decision to make. I could continue down this path of revenge, allowing my anger to fester, or I could choose a different route, one that involved healing and reconciliation. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on my choices. I had taken my revenge, but it hadn't brought me the satisfaction I had anticipated. Instead, it had left me feeling more isolated and lost than ever. I realized that I needed to confront my own demons before I could even think about forgiving Jessica or letting go of the pain that had consumed me. I decided to seek counseling for myself, to unpack the emotional turmoil I had been through. I needed to understand why I had let my desire for revenge overshadow my own well-being. It was a difficult step, but I knew it was necessary. As I embarked on this journey of self-reflection, I began to understand that healing would take time. I had to confront the depths of my anger, my feelings of betrayal, and the impact of my choices. I was determined to break free from the cycle of pain that had ensnared me, even if it meant facing the uncomfortable truths about myself. And as I took those first steps toward healing, I realized that the road ahead would not be easy. But it was a path I was finally willing to walk, one that would lead me toward understanding, forgiveness, and ultimately, a chance to reclaim my life. As I began my journey toward healing, I found solace in the quiet moments of self-reflection. Therapy sessions became a sanctuary where I could unpack my emotions, confront my feelings of betrayal, and explore the motivations behind my actions. Each session peeled back layers of anger and resentment, revealing the vulnerable parts of me that I had buried deep. My therapist, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Hayes, guided me through the complex web of my feelings. "Daniel, it's important to recognize that your pain is valid," she would say, her voice steady and reassuring. "But holding on to anger and seeking revenge only prolongs your suffering. You have to find a way to let go." Her words resonated with me, but it was easier said than done. I spent hours reflecting on my marriage with Jessica, the love we had built, and the betrayal that had shattered it. I could see the cracks in our relationship, the moments where communication had faltered, leading us to this point of no return. I learned to articulate my feelings, expressing my hurt and disappointment instead of bottling them up. I began to understand that revenge wasn't the answer. It was merely a temporary distraction from the deeper issues I needed to confront. I realized that my desire to punish Jake had stemmed from my own insecurities and fears about being unworthy of love. Meanwhile, Jessica continued her efforts to reconnect, attending couples therapy sessions in parallel to my individual therapy. She was determined to prove her commitment to our marriage, and as I listened to her heartfelt apologies and pledges to change, I felt a flicker of hope, but hope was complicated. I still grappled with the image of her with Jake, the betrayal that had cut so deep. I often found myself at a crossroads, torn between the desire to rebuild our marriage and the lingering scars of her infidelity. One evening, as I sat on the couch, I received a message from Jake. It was unexpected, and my heart raced as I read his words. He expressed remorse, acknowledging the pain he had caused and admitting that he had lost everything due to his reckless actions. He wrote about his struggles since being fired from the cruise line, how he felt lost and alone, and how he wished things had turned out differently. I was taken aback. Part of me wanted to respond with anger, to remind him of the pain he had inflicted on me and Jessica. But another part of me recognized the humanity in his words. He was a man who had made a terrible mistake, and while his actions had consequences, he was also suffering. I sat in silence, contemplating how to respond. I had spent so much time focused on revenge that I hadn't considered the possibility of empathy. Perhaps part of my healing journey involved understanding that people are flawed and capable of change. It was a difficult pill to swallow, but I knew that holding onto hatred would only keep me chained to my past. In that moment, I decided to reply. I wrote a message acknowledging his pain, but I made it clear that I would not condone his actions. I told him that while I understood he was suffering, he needed to take responsibility for his choices. My message was firm yet compassionate, a reflection of the growth I had experienced in therapy. As I hit send, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was no longer consumed by the need for revenge. Instead, I was choosing to let go of the anger that had held me captive for so long. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. In the following weeks, Jessica and I continued to work on our marriage. We attended therapy together, where we explored the roots of our issues and learned to communicate more openly. It was challenging, but I began to see glimpses of the love we had once shared. We laughed together again, reminisced about our adventures, and slowly, the walls that had been built between us started to crumble. I was beginning to understand that forgiveness was not about excusing someone's actions. It was about freeing myself from the burden of anger. It was about recognizing that while Jessica had hurt me, she was also human, capable of making mistakes. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I turned to Jessica. "I want to try," I said, my voice steady. "I want to rebuild what we had, but it's going to take time." Tears filled her eyes and she nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes, Daniel. I love you and I'm so sorry for what I did." As we embraced, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. The road ahead would be long, but I was willing to walk it with her. I was learning to let go of the past and embrace the possibility of a future together. But even as I took these steps toward healing, I knew that the scars of betrayal would take time to fade. I had come to terms with the fact that forgiveness was a journey, not a destination. And while I had released my grip on revenge, I still had to navigate the complexities of rebuilding trust. In the back of my mind, I wondered what Jake was doing. Had he learned from his mistakes? Was he on his own path toward redemption? Perhaps the answers didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered was my own journey, my own healing, and the chance to reclaim the love I thought I had lost forever. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself navigating the journey of rebuilding my life, piece by piece. Jessica and I continued to attend therapy, and with each session, we peeled back layers of pain, hurt, and misunderstanding. We learned to communicate with honesty and vulnerability, sharing our fears and dreams in a way we hadn't done in years. It wasn't easy. There were days when the memories of her betrayal threatened to overwhelm me, moments when I could feel the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. But I had learned to confront those feelings, to acknowledge them without allowing them to consume me. I had come to understand that healing was not a linear process. It was a series of ups and downs, a winding road that required patience and commitment. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I turned to Jessica. "Do you remember when we first met, how we used to talk for hours about everything and nothing?" A smile broke across her face, and for a moment the weight of our past lifted. "Of course. I remember thinking how easy it was to be with you. You made me feel safe." Safe. The word resonated with me. It was something I had longed for, something that had been shattered by her infidelity. "I want to feel that way again," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. "We can get there," she replied, her eyes earnest. "I know it will take time, but I want to earn your trust back. I want to be the partner you deserve." In that moment, I realized that rebuilding our marriage was a mutual effort. It wasn't just about forgiving her. It was about both of us committing to growth and understanding. I had to let go of the anger I had held onto for so long and allow myself to trust her again. It was a daunting task, but I was beginning to see a glimmer of hope. Meanwhile, I had not heard from Jake since that one message I had sent him. I had assumed he was working on his own journey, trying to make sense of the choices he had made. Occasionally, I would catch glimpses of his life through social media, posts of him traveling, exploring new places, and appearing to find a renewed sense of purpose. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Perhaps he was learning from his mistakes just as I was. One day, I received a surprise message from Jake. He reached out to thank me for my previous response, expressing that my words had given him a new perspective. He admitted that he had been lost and that he was working on himself. "I've realized how much I took for granted," he wrote. "I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused you and Jessica. I hope one day I can make amends." Reading his words, I felt a mix of emotions. I wanted to respond with anger, to remind him of the chaos he had caused, but I took a deep breath and decided to reply with compassion. I wished him well on his journey and encouraged him to continue learning from his past mistakes. It was a cathartic moment, one that reinforced my commitment to healing. I was no longer defined by my anger or my need for revenge. I was reclaiming my power, choosing to focus on my own growth rather than dwelling on the past. As the seasons changed, Jessica and I found ourselves growing closer. We began to take small trips together, rediscovering the joy of exploring new places hand in hand. We laughed more, shared our dreams, and built new memories that began to overshadow the pain of our past. One evening, while watching the sunset at the beach, I turned to her, feeling a warmth in my heart that had been absent for so long. "I think I'm starting to forgive you, Jess. I think I'm starting to forgive myself, too." Tears brimmed in her eyes and she nodded, a smile breaking through her apprehension. "Thank you, Daniel. I promise to never take your love for granted again." In that moment, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. I had learned that forgiveness was not just a gift I was giving to Jessica, it was a gift I was giving to myself. I was freeing myself from the chains of anger and resentment, allowing space for love and healing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized that my journey was far from over. There would still be challenges ahead, moments where doubt might creep in. But I had learned to trust the process, to embrace the complexities of love and forgiveness. I took Jessica's hand, feeling the warmth of her touch, and for the first time in a long time I felt a sense of peace. We were both works in progress, navigating the labyrinth of our hearts. But together, we were learning to rebuild, to love, and to trust again. And as I looked out at the vast ocean before us, I felt a profound sense of hope. Life was unpredictable, filled with twists and turns, but I was ready to embrace whatever came next. I had chosen the path of healing, and for the first time in a long time, I believed in the possibility of a brighter future.